The first and second discourses, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And I'm going to just read something from the preface here. And backing up, actually, I'm going to read a little forward. It's interesting. He writes, "What is celebrity? Here is the unfortunate work to which I owe mine. Certainly this place, which won me a prize and made me famous, is at best mediocre, and I dare add that it is one of the slightest of this whole collection. What an abyss of miseries the author would have avoided, if only this first written work had been received as it deserved to be." And then from his preface, he writes, "Here is one of the greatest and noblest questions ever debated." And that is, the question is, are the arts and sciences designed and intended to either purify or corrupt mortal men? This discourse is not concerned with those metaphysical subtleties that have prevailed in all parts of learning, and from which the announcements of academic competitions are not always exempt. Rather, it is a matter of one of those truths that concern the happiness of mankind. I foresee that I will not easily be forgiven for the side I have dared to take. Running counter to everything that men admire today, I can expect only universal blame. And the fact of having been honored by the approval of a few wise men does not allow me to count on the approval of the public. But then my mind is made up. I do not care to please either the witty or the fashionable. At all times there will be men destined to be subjugated by the opinions of their century, their country, their society. A man who plays the free thinker and philosopher today would, for the same reason, have been only a fanatic at the time of the League. One must not write for such readers when one wants to live beyond one's century." Rousseau is an interesting figure, and certainly there are some aspects that I can definitely vibe with, I guess you could say, and then there's some that make me cringe a little bit. And I think the whole reason I'm bringing this up is that I feel that is when we discuss various ideologies, movements, philosophies, sometimes we invoke these words that serve to not simply describe what the movement is, but to not simply articulate our disagreement with it, but really to just burn it to the ground, right? So one example would be liberal, right? And I say this as somebody who's definitely made a lot of statements about liberalism and so forth. And that could give the misconstrued idea that there is no value found in liberal thought. And so just, reading this short little passage here from Rousseau, I can definitely get down with, what he wrote here about running counter to everything that men admire today. I can expect only universal blame. And that, there's the issue of going with the flow of society when one feels that one wants to break out. I can definitely relate to that. The difference is, what is the source that's informing me to want to buck the trend of the society that I live in, or what is, what is it that I'm trying to get at? Like, what is the goal, right? And so he lists such things as being a free thinker, right? And that's another such word that we hear a lot, being a free thinker. And of course, that's a word invoked a lot by atheists and whatnot, and seldom invoked by the religious. And so myself, definitely, I see no issue with being a person both of faith, belief, specifically in Islam, as well as being a so-called traditionalist. I'll even accept neo-traditionalist. I want to be free to think upon those things, so that I can arrive at the goal of what God has created me to do, which is to worship Him. And so I want to be able to think freely and act freely, to obtain those objectives. And indeed, if I set out upon that task, then I will probably, I definitely will, as he says, I will not be able to expect any honor by the public, right? As he talks about that, even though you might find a few people that might agree with you, right? And that's like what we have today, right? In some ways, social media can become like a silo. And so you're either interacting with people who are vehemently opposed to you. Somebody corrected me and says it's vehement, but anyway, I'm going to say vehement. That either you're dealing with people who are just, completely opposed to you, or you're siloed in with those who do. And so he says, that you cannot count on the approval of the public. That's true. And for me, reading some of this, reading some Rousseau, obviously I'm going to disagree with him on a great number of things, but I'm only saying this, that actually the spirit of his thrust, so to speak, right? The spirit of not so much why he's doing what he's doing, because that's, he and I are going to definitely disagree on the why, but the how. Definitely there will be some congruence, crossover, and empathy as to the how, right? I want to be free to think and act, however, but I want to be free so that I can think in a particular way, right? I want to be free so that I can be free to think as a Muslim ought to think, and behave as a Muslim ought to think, and act as a Muslim ought to think. And yes, that can definitely run very, that might seem almost counterintuitive to some people, but for myself, no. And so that's why sometimes when I read, these European cats from the Renaissance and, let's say post-Enlightenment and on, yes, there's a lot there to disagree with. But there will sometimes be things like, that guy's kind of interesting. I don't agree with his, I don't agree with his conclusion, but there might be aspects of his premise that I go, all right. And my point of saying this is that if we as a community are going to indeed deal with this stuff, right? Because these things, these ideas that, started back in the 18th century, or actually going back before, but let's just say somebody like Rousseau, we're dealing somebody from maybe like this, thinkers from the 17th or 18th century, whose ideas still continue to have a major impact on the ideas circulating around in the air today, even if people aren't 100% aware of that. It's important for us to be able to dismantle them and also to do so in the most fair way possible. Because I feel like if we look at the revelation of the Quran, of course, it came to abolish, polytheism, right? So it came to absolutely abolish the idea of associating partners with Allah. It came to abolish aspects of the society that were unjust, but it did not come to burn the society to the ground and remake it in some new abstract image. And this is something, I was talking with my wife the other day, and we were discussing a number of things. And one of those was that, Islam as a religion, while having lofty values and having a grand end objective, go to Jannah, right? Between A and Z, between dunya and akhirah, it is willing to deal with things that are not always the perfect set of circumstances. I said in some ways you can look at monogamy and polygyny. Like a lot of times people will focus on the aspect of Islam and its allowance for polygyny. But it allows for monogamy and polygyny. And I don't think that it can be argued that polygyny is an ideal, given that there are so many parameters around it, and certainly more parameters around polygyny, for instance, than there are around monogamy, right? And so because of that, we cannot say that it is an ideal, right? Rather, it is, hey, sometimes circumstances aren't perfect, and people should not be left out of the fullness and the richness of both the human experience and what I might term the God experience, right? The Muslim experience. Nobody should be left out of that because their situation isn't ideal. And not enough time to go to it in this little clip, but in some ways, that's how I feel about the issue of how slavery is tackled, right? In the beginning, clearly the Quran advocates and incentivizes to set people free, without a doubt. And in fact, as a reward for God's pleasure in the hereafter, right? And so that shouldn't be seen as like, yeah, you'll get your reward in the hereafter. But no, what higher reward is there for anything than the garden that Allah has prepared, than the garden, the paradise that God has prepared? There is no higher reward for anything. So emancipating somebody, right, it sets up a very lofty goal. But in the interim, there will be rules set around not abusing people. Meaning it's not ideal. It's not ideal to be a slave. And of course, it's very hard to even discuss this term, particularly of the history of slavery in the West, which was very different than the rest of the world. And this isn't trying to, whitewash or sanitize slavery in the Muslim world. But my whole point is, again, without making this a whole entire video about that, is what? It's the fact that Islam has always been willing to deal with less than favorable circumstances while advocating for the most optimum, right? The most optimum is monogamy. The most optimal is not to be in bondage. The most optimal is all these things, right? And yet it will deal and allow for a sliding scale of non-optimal conditions so that everybody has a chance of participating in the broader game of trying to get to the ideal. You may disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But to me, that's part of the genius of Islam. And what I often find is the unarticulated issue with many other ideologies and philosophies, that while they may, purport a great ideal, The problem is they don't seem to be willing to deal or even offer any in between. It's like a all or nothing or all type thing. So my plan is to also do a review for this on the Bibliophile podcast, inshallah. But I just wanted to throw this out here for a little tidbit, a little bite. So inshallah, got to get ready to go to a wedding talking about monogamy and optimal situations. Inshallah, may Allah bless the bride and groom and give them much happiness in this life and the next. And may Allah Ta'ala bless our beloved guide and messenger and his beloved family and companions and anyone that follows them until the end of time. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum.